Strickland, and I'm a senior theater student here at UCF. Thank you guys for joining us today. Our goal is to share with the greater UCF community some of the exciting learning and collaboration going on in our theater classrooms. Thanks to our guest, Emily Freeman. Thanks to Stephen Risco and Victoria Weston in marketing. Thanks to Chloe and the UCF Dramaturgs, and thanks to the School of Performing Arts for their support. Just as a note, this session is being recorded. Later, it will be available on YouTube so you can share it with friends. If you enjoy this session, we have another chat on Thursday about dramaturgy and theater for social change with UCF Professor Holland McDonald. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Emily Freeman, who I've been lucky enough to work with this past year. Emily Freeman is the Director of Community Partnerships at Orlando Repertory Theater. She received her MFA in Drama and Theater for Youth Communities from the University of Texas at Austin in 2013. She received her BA in Theater from Northwestern University in 2008. Emily has worked for Adventure Stage Chicago, John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, Imagination Stage, and a solo repertory theater. She taught as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Central Florida and Seminole State College. She is an applied theater artist, director, produced playwright, and educator. Emily served on the American Alliance for Theater and Education Board of Directors and is a member of the Association for Theater and Higher Education and TYA USA. In her role at Orlando Rep, she directs community engagement programs, teaches professional development, and is the dramaturg on select projects. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So do you want to tell us a bit about the Rep and your job specifically?
I would love to. So as Mia said, my road to TYA started in undergrad. I wanted to be a performer initially, and when I was attending Northwestern, took my first storytelling and creative drama class and really fell in love with theater offstage and theater in classrooms and community spaces as an education tool, as a tool for research, and just really fell in love with all of the things that theater allows us to do and explore in our lives. And so then I kind of followed a path of looking for education opportunities, educational theater, theater for young audiences. And that brought me to my graduate degree at UT Austin, where I got to take on many roles, including working in dramaturgy for the first time and learning, taking my first community engagement class too, which I soon discovered really there's such a strong intersection in our field, and specifically the field for TYA in dramaturgy, education, and actually marketing. And kind of looking at that intersection a lot recently in my job, and kind of really finding my voice. I think this year with our, collaboration is looking really different. And at the Rep, having a chance to really engage in our show that we're doing, which is Vote with a question mark. And typically our departments somewhat are siloed. So you have the education department, you have production, you have kind of administration, marketing, and development, fundraising. And, with everything that happened, we kind of erased our traditional roles and our silos and really looked at how all of our roles intersect and the ways in which we can collaborate together. And so that looked really different. We had our development director in some of our summer camp classes this year, and we had a lot of our production staff involved in our classes and educational opportunities. And then in turn, we were really invited in maybe a new way into our production process. And that was really exciting for me because it'd been, I think traditionally we create our educational materials using our dramaturgy tools, but almost as a reaction to what's on the stage. So we'll have our production team work really closely together, bringing in our creative artists, and they'll hire outside designers and directors, and then we have a staff of costume shop folks and prop shops, and we're a producing house, so we create everything in-house. And so that happens in its own beautiful bubble, and then all of us kind of work to market the show, to find those education connections, and then respond to it and find ways to then show teachers how this is useful in their classrooms, to show audiences ways to kind of deepen their thinking around the show they're seeing. And so we create a ton of resource guide materials and post-show discussions. We think about how our lobby is full of engaging questions or activities that might further and deepen the experience of seeing the show, especially for our younger friends. And this year, we were brought in at the very beginning of the process of producing Vote, which was really exciting. And I think it was because we knew we needed all hands on deck, and there was a desire to kind of throw our traditional model out the window. And so integrating fully into those production meetings and hearing what the directors were asking, and then getting to really think about how those same questions were woven through our education materials. And then on top of that, we really wanted to think about how to connect the show to what was happening in our own community and 2020 election. And a lot of that meant, who do we know in our community that we can engage as kind of experts and have both serving the creative team in process, and then also using some of those resources to further the education of our audiences. So we interviewed Bill Cowles from he's the supervisor of elections in Orange County, and like that turned into a backstage interview and getting to take a tour of the whole space, and then getting to share that with the production team and what we learned about how we're preparing for the 2020 election. And then finding a connection to the League of Women Voters and hearing about their own journey for really interesting kind of their own pathway towards needing to diversify their membership, and wanting to respond to what's happening in the world right now and Black Lives Matter, and connecting with them on all of that, and then also learning about their amazing resources they have to help educate voters about the density of language and amendments, for example. So all of that I got to take on, and then provide that to our production team, think about how to package it and bring it to our audiences for education materials, and then how to use it to tell the story of all of the work we're doing for marketing. And I think that marketing piece is the last kind of intersection that I'm finding a lot recently, is how do we tell the story of our work? We're all doing this amazing work, and sometimes it feels like we do it for ourselves. We're not sharing out all of these amazing programs that we're doing, maybe in small little kind of experiences. We just had an amazing talk back with, we showed the show to 50 Rollins students and who are involved in a program called the Democracy Project, and their major professor of political science, did our talk back. And so we were connecting political science and theater, and some of these students had never seen professional production, let alone a theater for young audiences production. But I think that then how do I tell the story of that experience and share it out with our audiences, and the rich learning that we took away from hearing that professor speak about the themes of the show. So I think those are kind of the fun, it makes my job different every single day. But those three kind of categories, dramaturgy, education, and marketing, are all things I navigate every day in my job, and maybe not something I would have expected in my role.
Thank you for that.
Talking at you.
Yeah. No, it's great. You touched on it, but do you want to talk a little bit more about the resource guide you created for Vote and the dramaturgy that went into that?
Yes, absolutely. So we, in the past, have always created a paper resource guide. So this is something that teachers typically need. They kind of talk about it as a pass to get a field trip. So the last page has our Florida state standards, and we're drawing all of the connections for how whatever show it is that we're doing directly supports Florida state standards and the kind of benchmarks they're needing to meet with their curriculum. And oftentimes teachers print out that last page and bring it to their principal and say, this is why it connects to my curriculum. Can I get funding, or can I get approved for a field trip? And we know that that's how many teachers use the guide. I think other teachers do use the guide. It has pretty traditional categories where the first page is a full synopsis. It's not a teaser, it is the full synopsis, and it is extremely detailed. There's definitely spoiler alerts in it, but we find that teachers want to know exactly what they're about to bring their students to see. And especially if it's a new play. If it's a piece around a book, which is a lot of what we do, is adapted literature, and book, children's books that have been adapted for the stage. But if it's a new work and something they're not familiar with, they absolutely are going to want to see that full synopsis to make sure they approve of the themes and the content. And we find that really a useful tool for getting the show into, for getting students into the theater. We also always provide guided discussion questions with the hopes that even if they're on the bus on their way to the show, that they can be engaging in a bus pre-show discussion and then a bus post-show discussion. What a great way to use for Orlando some of those long commutes to and from our theater. We're located downtown, so we encourage that. And then we also always have activities that are written in friendly kind of student language for things that they could be doing with their students after the show. So whether it's what we call an arts integrated activity, which is a focus on an arts goal and a focus on a curricular goal, and we're using both of those to meet objectives in both of those areas. Or if it's just a writing prompt and we're inviting them to think a little bit more deeply about the show themes, we always do that with all of our shows. For this show, it's so rich with history. The show takes our main character back in history, and she meets all the way back to the Revolutionary War, to the women's suffrage movement, to civil rights, Martin Luther King, and then to protesting in the late 1960s and early 1970s around the voting age. So the main character meets all of these historical figures. And for many, there are historical figures represented that are not necessarily in our students' history books, and they're not learning about them. And so we needed to really make sure that they had these kind of character profiles. And so we developed a page on and also we wanted to think a little bit more about the form of our resource guide this year. So everything is digital. We do have the traditional PDF paper guide that is available, but now that it's kind of exploded out on the website, if you Google something, maybe our show will show up, and maybe one of the links from the discussion will show up, and it might be even more accessible. So on that, we have some kind of rich character profiles, and then on that same page, some activities for students. And then we have an amendments page that talks about all of that kind of dense language for the different amendments that came out of what our characters in the show were fighting for, and then some activities to connect to amendments. And then we also did the expert interviews. And so we're still populating the website with more content. We're thinking about, okay, let's throw on we've got now some really great interviews that I helped create with our creative team, where we ask them about process and trying to invite students into that process of creating a show. And then I think the final layer is, how do we talk about that this is still theater production, it's still theatrical production, but we filmed it. And it was really unique. We had to think about how to film it in a way that it still honored the traditional art form, but then we also used film to our advantage with quick changes, with a little bit more dynamic wigs and costume pieces and makeup to really kind of make the characters pop. So all of that is kind of woven throughout the guide.
Awesome, thank you for that. I was wondering how the dramaturgical process differs for TYA as opposed to a more general audience.
I can speak to what I know, which is what I'm doing. And I think my interpretation is that a dramaturg's job is traditionally done, they're much more integrated into that production process. And then oftentimes, there are those additional extensions of getting to guide post-show activities and discussions and think about audience engagement. I would say a lot of our work is heavy on the audience engagement side and heavy on the how are we translating what we're doing to teachers and that kind of educational vocabulary. So if we can speak their language, they realize that it's rigorous and going to meet those standards that they're expected to kind of do in their day-to-day jobs, and that it is a rigorous and engaging and dynamic educational experience. So a lot of that work is advocating and kind of doing a lot of translating, and then that all of that translates to our marketing too. So we just sent out, it's a great example, we're having trouble booking the show, and you would not think that we would. It's $1 per student. It's so accessible. And then we also are getting funding for classrooms, but we're having trouble booking it. And I think teachers are just so overwhelmed right now. It's a really different world. Obviously, a field trip used to look like sending a permission slip home, getting to, take an entire day out of your school day, transport your students to a theater, bring them back. And we, for our kind of financial model, could always count on field trips as a revenue source for us. So we know we see 60,000 students a year just in field trips, and we can't count on that. And also most of our field trips book by December for the entire season. So it's very competitive to get in to see our shows. A lot of teachers get on waiting lists and, know that we're an exciting experience for their students. So there's been no urgency behind booking this show because it's available whenever. It's a streaming link. They can do it at any time, any day. And that's taken urgency away from that booking process. And so we're finding, we're like, okay, people are telling us they're going to watch the show, but when are, we're November 8th is our last streaming date. And we're at October 19th. What's going on? So we just sent a email out today that said, let us teach your class for a week. And we took our resource guide, reformatted it, and we literally did in a document, here's Monday, here's your lesson plan, here's Tuesday, here's your lesson plan, here's Wednesday, and Monday and Tuesday, they're watching the show. Wednesday, you're doing, and those come with discussion questions. Wednesday, here are all your activities, Thursday, Friday. And I've had like 5 emails come in from teachers asking for more information. So hopefully that's working, but we're just trying to figure out what language and how we can translate all of this work we've already done to make it really accessible to them right now.
That's really cool. I was curious about the Youth Academy. How are the Youth Academy students, are they involved in dramaturgy? Do they know what dramaturgy is? And kind of how the dramaturgy process changes on whether or not it's a Youth Academy show or it's a main stage show?
Yeah, I think the process is so unique to each title. We don't have a proven process for using dramaturgy. I will also say all of our directors and creative team members, everybody wears multiple hats. And so oftentimes people are in that space. But with Youth Academy, we do like to think about how we can come into the process early on, and they have limited time for rehearsals, and there's typically a huge number of students in a cast, and so we're trying to find ways for them to personalize the content to their own lives, or draw connections to what's going on in the world, whatever it might be. So we'll pick a guided kind of big picture question that the directors may be interested in exploring, and then do a mini workshop. And again, I think it's really dependent on what the content of the show is. I find when the content is geared towards social justice, and maybe there's a little bit more of a social justice lens on whatever the show title is, there's more interest in bringing a dramaturg in. When they're doing Shrek, they're less interested in that. It's like, we need another music rehearsal. So I think oftentimes we're trying to think about who And especially right now, who can we bring in? Vote dealt with a lot of, I'm back to Vote again, but it makes me think about who we brought into the rehearsal process. Vote is dealing with identity and voter suppression based on race and gender. And so we wanted to think about, we had 2 female directors, white women, and they really wanted to make sure we could think about some other guests and voices to bring into the creative process. And so I was tasked with finding some other experts to come in so that the actors could ask questions. And we did a really exciting discussion with Chev Lovett, he works for Organized Florida, and they do a lot of work around voter suppression. And he spoke a lot about that. And we were also, really getting a chance to kind of expand who was in the room or in the Zoom. And that was really important. So to circle back to Youth Academy, I think if the show is navigating themes that may stir or may, be closely related to social justice, we'll oftentimes think about how we can bring dramaturgy or guided questions or research or guests into the process to make sure we're kind of going deep on the theme and giving it its due.
So this is sort of similar, but how do you think the dramaturgy changes depending on the age group?
That's really interesting. And right away, it made me think about the more recent work we've been doing in early childhood and theater for the very young, which requires a lot of dramaturgy and dreaming and devising and sitting in world creation and thinking about environment. And that's can be for 0 to 5-year-olds. So I don't think an age group, I don't think it's limited to an age group, but I think it just looks different. Yeah.
What challenges are there when doing dramaturgy for theater for young audiences?
I think, we all navigate time, and, everyone has time constraints in a rehearsal process. So I think, our rehearsal process is traditionally 3 weeks. And so, we just need to figure out how to integrate that from the beginning and not feel like we're then having to fight the director for really precious time. And so I think that's always a challenge, is scheduling in the time for deep discussion or questions or presentations if we're, wanting to present something about, some context or culture or history that's represented in the show. So time is always a challenge. And then I think our biggest challenge, is we do a lot of work, and I do wonder how often people are reading all of this content we're creating, or watching the content we're creating. This year, we wanted to really have a ton. I think we focused on breadth and depth this year. And I really wonder how deeply teachers are reading some of the things we're writing, or if any of our general audiences are also taking some time to engage in some of these, I think, really exciting content we put out. And so that then means that marketing and telling people that this is out there and it's free to, go along with your ticket experience is one of our challenges too. How do we not, fill people's inboxes with millions of emails, but also kind of get strategic with how we're sharing what we're doing? And I think that was kind of that inspiration of that email to say, teachers, we'll plan your class for a week. Let's try that and see, because it just seems that is really hopefully responsive to what they're all telling us. So yeah, I think asking questions of our audience too. I think that's where that email came from too, is asking a bunch of teachers, what do you need right now? What can we do? You told us this show was relevant to you all and would connect with a lot of what you're studying. How can we help you? And finding out that many of them in this launch ed model, where they have students at home and students in person, their lesson planning process has not just doubled, but tripled in time, because they're having to fill out these Canvas modules and what all of this structure looks like. So shifting our structure to fit theirs.
Great. I wanted to ask, so your job title is Director of Community Partnerships, and it sounds like a lot of the dramaturgy is being done in the education department. Are there any other specific positions that end up doing a lot of the dramaturgy, or is it usually mostly you?
No, I think we all, that's a good question. I like I said, I think the creative team, um, that research and sharing process and dreaming process, at least from what I've experienced in the production meetings, kind of everyone takes that on and then brings their research to the table. And I think in the past, the director has then kind of sifted through that. And so to be a part of that and get to use that kind of all of that beautiful knowledge dump and then try to translate that for what we're doing this year, I got to do, and then we also got to bring on Joni Newman, who is one of our graduate students at UCF. She has an assistantship with the rep. So we have an amazing partnership with UCF, where the graduate students in the MFA Theater for Young Audiences program get to kind of be in residence with us at the theater. And so that looks like a lot of different things. Sometimes they're an assistant in the education department. Sometimes they're learning about development, or they're learning about marketing and helping with social media. It can look lots of different ways, and really hopefully somewhat responsive to what they're interested in. And Joni, it was like a perfect fit. She was had been a high school teacher for many, many years, and kind of went back to school with an interest in TYA. And so she kind of jumped in with both feet on the research for this show, and I mean is really the reason the character profile pages have so much depth and thoughtfulness. She also she curated a beautiful list of additional resources. So that's here's our resources we recommend for whether you're looking at books or digital resources. And she just did some really thoughtful curating around each grade level. What would be interesting for students to read if they wanted to read more? What books really helped extend the representation of the piece? How we're talking about powerful women, how we're talking about powerful Black women from history. So really some thoughtful curating, and just did a beautiful job with that. So that was like such an amazing kismet to have her on the team. And so we'll oftentimes have our graduate students supporting that work, which is absolutely amazing. And I think for them, if they end up in an education department at a theater, it's a great experience, because we all have to figure out how to connect the themes of our shows to some really strong educational resources. And I think hopefully she got a good, Samantha said hard agree, a good chance doing that, which I think is great.
Awesome. So if a youth academy student expressed an interest in dramaturgy, would there be certain camps and classes that would be a good fit for that, or to guide them into becoming a part of dramaturgy and becoming a dramaturg?
Mia, you've got to make one for us. We need a class. That's a great idea. No, I mean, I don't think we have that yet, but we need to dream something up. I think that's brilliant. We have, our first and primary audience are the students that want to be on stage. And then we have worked really hard to also develop some of our design classes and think about young designers. And we have a beautiful makeup class now. And we have, all of these other offerings that show that there are many roles to be, to have in a theater. And that's the last piece of our puzzle. We need a dramaturgy class for sure. We've done playwriting and had students have a chance to kind of think about crafting stories or original narratives, but we haven't done any sort of research or lobby engagement or post-show discussion thoughtfulness. So we haven't had any of that. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. All right. This is my last question before I open it up for questions from other people in the Zoom. But how do you think that the reps dramaturgical process benefits your productions and your organization?
Oh my gosh, and Joni's coming on right now. Um, that's perfect. Her ears were burning. I think, um, Joni, we were just talking about you.
I should go.
No, no, all the best ways. I'm just singing your praises. I really
I
think,
was at an appointment. I didn't mean to be late.
no, you're fine. I mean, in so many ways, I think it it absolutely extends and educates. It engages. It hopefully even helps with access. Taking time to really think about developmentally how we're helping students into the topic of the show, and inviting them to take time with the content. Um, yeah, I think all of those, yeah.
Great, thank you. So if anybody else in the Zoom has a question, you can unmute and ask it. You can message it to me and I can read it, whatever you're comfortable with.
I have just a question about what you recommend the best ways to get involved are, because just like hearing about this, because I'm double majoring in theater and political science, I'm like, I wish I could have gotten involved with a vote.
Cameron, you still can. We need to do something.
I did the internship at the rep with Mia last semester too.
Yeah, I think an internship is a great way to start. I think with this show, send me an email and let's talk about something we could do with your fellow classmates with the political science students, because it'd be great if we could do a group sharing of the show and then do a post-show discussion, which has been a really exciting format. Everyone kind of has to watch the show on their own time, synchronously on their own devices, and then we come back together on Zoom and have a discussion, but that's such a fun way to do it. And then I think, we have also in normal times, we have a ton of volunteers that work at the theater. And then we have all of our teaching artist positions are contracted. So we hire out teaching artists, we hire out stage managers. A lot of times those folks are coming from UCF, which is wonderful for us. And then additionally, our designers and our directors are also contracted. So sometimes we'll direct in-house. Jeff, our artistic director, will direct traditionally 2 shows a year. And then Tara Cromer and Jen Adams is our senior education director, and Tara Cromer is actually our props manager, but she is a director as well and has traditionally directed a show every single year. So, but outside of that, we do contract directors. And then all of our actors as well for our main stage are folks that, are from the community, from UCF, from the parks, and we do auditions and callbacks really 2 times a year, 2 big kind of waves of callbacks. We'll do a big fall callbacks time and then a big spring one, and then they'll book the shows throughout the year. So those are all the ways that people can get involved. And teaching artistry is, as far as in education, we're always looking for dynamic educators and people that are interested in teaching at the rep, teaching out in the community, teaching in schools. We do a lot of work outside of our building as well.
In one of my classes, we get extra credit if we watch a vote and write about it. So there's another way you could reach some audiences.
Yes, that's great.
If anyone else has any questions, feel free to unmute or pop them in the chat.
I have a question. It's a very divisive time in America, and I feel like you probably come in contact with all sorts of opinions, political, religious, and different attitudes about what the Black Lives Matter movement means and what even voting means to people. And one thing that I think is so great about children's audiences is that like they still are a little bit pre-politicized in a lot of ways, and they have these creative minds, but they still have parents, and they still have teachers, and they still have schools with all sorts of different agendas. And I just wonder how you navigate that, and maybe specifically how you might use dramaturgy and the sort of resources as a way to sort of heal rather than continue this dividedness.
Yeah. I mean, right away, this is not related. Well, and maybe it is related to dramaturgy. We had a really important kind of staff meeting, and this was in the summer. And so we have our one billboard sign is on Mills and is right in front of our theater in kind of Lock Haven Park. And so that sign is usually our, where we market summer camps and here's the next show. And we put up a sign this year that said, at Orlando Rep, we believe love is love and Black Lives Matter. And we're building a world for our future, or for our children's future. That's the kind of world we want to build. And we, of course, got response to it. But we also, I think got a lot of really positive response to that. And I think, Vote is a show that focuses on history. So it's I have someone knocking at my door. Hold one moment. I've got to tell them I'm on an important moment.
This is what happens when you ask those hard-hitting questions. The universe is just like knocking at your door.
Okay, sorry about that. We're going through construction in my house. So yes, with this show in particular, it is about history, but obviously it connects to everything that we're experiencing right now with the election. And that we didn't want it to be a show that was just for one political party. And so we did talk a lot about how it should be bipartisan, because it's about this privilege that we have, and that, but I think inherently a lot of our language and content is about how voting is right now still a privilege. It's not a right for everybody. So that does shift us into, a certain kind of political camp. But, we reached out to the DAR, we reached out to some different groups that we reached out to the Young Republicans, Young Democrats, and tried to connect with, I think, young people right now who are who do believe in voting and the right to vote. And that was kind of our way to focus on that. But of course, we've had some interesting response from people. I think we've had, just who are not taking time to read the show description. The show title, in an interesting way, on our Facebook marketing, we were flagged, and we couldn't run some of our Facebook ads prior to October 5th with the voting registration deadline, because they were deemed political. And that was really fascinating, that right now we were kind of being censored, and that was one of our, Facebook is a really great marketing space, and we couldn't post anything about the show. So I don't know, we've encountered that in lots of different ways. But I do think that we have never had any sort of pushback from young people, no matter what the topic is. And it's always coming from a parent or a teacher. And it's kind of our job just to say, thank you for sharing your feedback. And it's typically after a show, they've seen something, or they, are responding to something. So I think it's just holding space for that opinion and saying, we appreciate you sharing. And, you know, in many ways, we have to stand kind of firmly behind the choices that we're making right now for what we're putting on our stage. And this was one of those shows where we anticipated maybe that not everybody would be excited about it. And yet it's still, you know, as Joni and I had many amazing conversations, there's still so many stories that are not included in this show. There's plenty of continued historical erasure, and, you know, we need to keep pushing the envelope. It's not solving every problem.
I think this is probably the case for Vote, but when selecting shows for the season, is there certain themes you're trying to get at? Is there, we really want to teach this, this, and this, or we want this in their season? Is that kind of how it goes typically?
Yeah, you know, Jeff Jeff, our artistic director, selects our shows, and that's been our model for as long as I've been at the Rep. And I think, unfortunately, the economics behind titles are like a very big reason why some shows are selected. A recognizable title for a younger audience will do better because parents want to know what they're getting, teachers want to know what they're getting. I think that translates to all audiences, but you know, that is something we're always kind of butting up against, is that everybody wants to see the Pete the Cats because they know what the Pete the Cat books are about. But then how can we insert, you know, a play? We did 2 years ago, Polka Dots, which was really about the Little Rock Nine and looking at racism. And, you know, that show we did in our black box, so it was a smaller audience. And, you know, we kind of anticipated that that show was going to have fewer audiences, and it did. But that's one of the things that Jeff talks about, kind of desserts and vegetables. And that, you know, with young people, that there's, once they're in the theater, they love it. It's just the, how do we get people into the theater? And so the selection process, you kind of have to have a few desserts in your season, and then you've got to put your vegetables in too. But I would say all of our shows are savory and sweet at the same time. It's just, you got to get them in the door.
Is it sort of the same thing when selecting stuff for the Youth Academy?
Absolutely, yes. And then in general for Youth Academy, they, you know, I think shows that give opportunity for multiple performers is just always, you know, an important part of the selection process. How can we give space for all of our students to have a moment to shine? And typically musicals do better. So we're often doing a big Youth Academy musical for our fall and spring show, and then our summer stock show as well.
If anybody else has any questions, again, feel free, put them in the chat, unmute, whatever you're comfortable with. In the chat, Chloe said, is there anything that dramaturgs for adults could learn from TYA dramaturgy strategies?
I think something recently we've been talking a lot about for when we're all together in person again, is how when you come to the theater, you feel welcome. And I think right now we're thinking a lot about how institutions don't feel welcoming for everybody. And this kind of institutional racism and spaces that people like, you know, these art institutions that sit on this pedestal that, you know, am I even welcome if I open the door? Am I allowed to come in? Those feelings, how do we shift that? And how do we ensure that young people know that this is about them when they walk in the door? And for all young people when they walk in the door. And so, you know, we've worked over the last few years in thinking about how the lobby feels, what's in the lobby, how can we have students engaging in things they can touch and create and make in response to what they saw? How can we have things they leave behind so that others can read them and engage with them? How can we have space for them to see the actors in person and up close after a show and connect with them? How can we, make sure that they're seeing all of the little corners of the lobby where we have tons of beautiful information, books that are curated specifically to go along with the themes, so that they might be encouraged to read, at home with their families. So that idea of how do we make sure people feel welcome here and that this space is for them is something I think that we often think about with young people, but that we could think about with everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Unless anybody has any other questions, I think we're going to wrap up. Emily, thank you so much for being here. This was so lovely.
It was
Thank
wonderful.
you, Emily.
Thank you very, very much. It was so nice to see all of you, and I appreciate the time and space for this conversation.
Thank you, Emily, so much.
All right, see you all soon.
Go.
Bye.
Over.
Bye.
Bye.
That was great, Mia.
Thank you.
See you soon.
You too.